thank you all for coming. My name's Tom Pollock. I'm the founder and director of the DC Tutoring and Mentoring Initiative. I've been doing this work for around 8 years. It's hard to believe. And this is our inaugural volunteer tutoring and mentoring workshop. I'm just going to give a very, very brief introduction to Jan, who I think will kind of speak well for herself. So she has taught for a number of decades in Michigan, California, New Hampshire, and has perhaps more degrees than anybody I've ever met. Undergraduate degree in psychology and a graduate degree in psychology. She also has a master's in mild and moderate learning disabilities, a certificate in education therapy, and then a master's in school counseling alongside all those. She's been sort of using what's called the science of reading, which is sort of the approach to reading that today's teachers use for many decades before it was cool. And I'm going to turn it over to Jan.
Thanks, Tom. All right, so this is a pretty impressive group. I may need to up my game here. The thing I've noticed most about Washington since I came here from California is that the population in general here is just highly educated, and it's kind of a stimulating place to live because of that. So as Tom told you, I started out in psychology thinking I was going to be a clinical psychologist, and somehow along the way got hooked by an undergraduate student at the university where I was working on my master's, who was a paraplegic and who could not write papers or do any kind of written work. And so the school asked me if I would work with her to help her. And somehow, I'm not even quite sure how, I ended up moving from the clinical track to the educational track and ended up as a school counselor and learning specialist. As I moved around the country, my husband was in high tech. And as high tech moved from the East Coast to the West Coast, we moved. And as we moved, I had to reinvent myself because we got to some states where they were not hiring any counselors. And so I couldn't do that. So what else could I do? Which is how, excuse me, I ended up going back to school and getting a credential in learning disabilities. So I kind of had to become a lot of different things in different states as I moved across the way. And I retired now. This is the third time I've retired, but I am not retired, as you can tell. I am doing private tutoring. I am primarily working on kids with dyslexia. Although, excuse me, not all of my kids are coded. A lot of them just are not reading where they should be, and no one can quite figure out why. And so that's kind of part of my job. So let me tell you about tutoring. I think it's the most amazing thing in the whole world. And I suspect some of you have kind of done it, but just didn't know you were doing it because you were helping someone and you made a difference in their life. And really, that's what tutoring is all about. I think the gift you can give, especially younger kids, that makes a difference in their whole life forever is literacy. That when you cannot read, so many doors are closed to you. Even though you may have a lot of other talents, even though you may be gifted in mathematics, or you may have spatial abilities or artistic abilities, the world, at least at the moment, wants you to read. And for a while, I was teaching in a school in the Northeast here, and I had 8th graders who could not read. And they were going to quit school. They were 15, and they were just kind of hanging out till they were 16 to quit because they didn't think they could handle high school because they couldn't read. And I asked them if they wanted to drive a car, and 2 of them said yes. And I said, well, you have to pass a written test. And so we actually used the driver's book to learn how to read. And 2 of them actually got licenses. So there, you need to find the hook, and it's different for every kid. But the excitement when a kid learns to read or figures something out, that aha moment is, I think, the most incredible thing in the whole world. It's just amazing to me. And these kids teach me as much as I teach them on a daily basis. So one of the things that I do to kind of differentiate from school, because a lot of the times my kids come to me at the end of a day and they've been working hard at school, and some of them have worked really hard because they don't get it yet. And I don't want to give them the same thing. And in a lot of cases, what they got at school didn't work, which is why they need a tutor in the first place. And so my thing is games, and I make games every week. I probably have 150 games behind me in all those boxes you see behind me. Mostly I make card games. Sometimes I make board games. Some of them are fancy and laminated because I use them over and over and over again. And some of them are just written out on a piece of paper. They don't need to be fancy. They just need to serve the purpose. But I like to make a distinction, and I like to find a way to hook my kids and to make it fun. And I think every tutor needs to kind of find their thing. It may be that your kids really love being read to, and that for you, reading a book to a child and then talking about the book, talking about, have they had an experience like that? Does what happens in their house or what happens in their family is kind of the hook on where to go. In my experience, the main thing that you can do, no matter what kind of skills you have or don't have, is be the cheerleader for this kid. Most of the time, these students who are not at the top of their group, who are not in the highest reading group, who are not the one who gets the awards on Friday award days, they need someone cheering for them. They need someone who believes in them and someone who reminds them that they can do it. If you talk to the kids I work with, they will tell you, I tell them all the time, nothing is inherently hard or easy. Everything we know how to do, everything we understand is easy. And all those things we don't get, all those things we don't know how to do are hard. And so it's different for all of us, because what's easy for me may be hard for you. What's hard for you may be easy for me. So I really, truly spend, I would guess, 60% of my time saying things like, wow, I didn't know you could read that word. I was all set to help you and you read it. Or, that's amazing. You are so smart. And really, I think that is as important as any of the other things I do. That's what they need. They need someone who cares about them, who believes in them, and who wants to be there and help them. And I think that is the most amazing gift that you can give any human being, but especially a child. So some of you have taught before. And so I think the skills that you used for teaching, and even if you weren't in a classroom, if you had a resident or an intern, or even if you had junior members in your department that you were helping learn the ropes as new employees, or that's tutoring. And that's mentoring. So you've already done a lot of this. It's obviously slightly different if you have younger kids than older or adults, but the skill set is the same. As I said, I think most of it is being the cheerleader, is saying, wow, you are amazing. I just can't believe you know how to do that. And I have been known on many occasions when I play a game to ever so subtly lose. Because for those kids who need that win, because they don't have it somewhere else in their life, I want to make sure they get it. So here's kind of my philosophy in a nutshell. I think we all have a jar. Don't think about mayonnaise jar. Think Costco size jar, big jar. We all have. And every time something good happens to us, every time someone says, wow, you look nice today, or did you get a haircut? Every time we get a good grade on a test as a kid, every time we have a success, a marble goes in the jar. Every time we have a horrible day, we don't pass a test, we get a speeding ticket, we fight with our mother or our husband or one of our kids, a marble comes out of the jar. My thinking is, it's my job to make sure my kids always have enough marbles in that jar so that they can afford to lose some, so that it's never empty. So that when you don't do well at school, when you get put in the lowest reading group, when on top of that, you don't get picked for the team till the very end, and you fight with your mother over breakfast, and you lose all those marbles, there need to be some left in that jar. There need to be enough there as a cushion so that you can still feel good about yourself. And that's really the biggest part of tutoring. So for those of you who have had teaching before, my next piece, I just wanted to kind of bring into your conscious thinking. If you haven't been in education, but you've been in other fields, you know that every field has its own jargon and buzzwords and alphabets. And education has more than any other field I've been in. But one of the latest things that people are talking about is called phonemic awareness. A phoneme is the smallest unit of sound in the English language. So phonemic awareness is an ability to distinguish and discriminate and play with sounds. It has nothing to do with reading. It has nothing to do with letters. It's just listening and moving sounds around. And the latest research shows that, like reading, probably 75 to 80% of kids will figure it out on their own from the experiences they have at home and at school. But 17 to 20-ish% of kids won't get it and will need some kind of teaching to help them get it. So it turns out our brain, evolutionary, we are born with an ability to speak. No one needs to teach us to make sounds. They maybe need to teach us words, but the ability to speak and to make sounds is natural. The ability, if we are not suffering with some kind of a physical disability, to hear and to see are also things we are born with. No one needs to teach us. But we have not been reading long enough on the evolutionary ladder for it to be built into our brain yet. And therefore, it requires specific, systematic teaching, because we are using that part of our brain, which in the past was used to recognize prey when we were hunters, or people as part of our clan or not part of our clan, friend or foe, has been kind of rewired in our brain now to recognize letters. And that's the part of the brain we're using for reading. And we haven't been doing it for a long enough time that it's a natural thing. And some of us need a lot more teaching and explicit examples to break that alphabetic code than others. So phonemic awareness is something that tutors could do for 5 minutes when they saw a kid or a group of kids, make it into a kind of fun game, and would make an incredible difference later on in this child's or adult's ability to read. And it works like this. It starts with big segments. So I might say to a kid, say, bird bath. Now say it without the bath. And I would start with compound words and ask them to leave off a part. Then I would move to a more discrete skill where I would be moving letters around. So as I said, it has nothing to do with knowing what letters make the sound or reading letters or writing letters. It's just that ability to hear individual sounds. So it starts with big chunks and works to smaller chunks as you go along, so that I might eventually end up with what I would call a chain. So I would say to a child, say cat. Now, it actually does make a difference if you can get the kid to repeat the word out loud. Saying it out loud has an effect rather than just thinking it in your brain. Say cat. Now take away the k sound and instead put in a t sound. What word do you have? Now take away the t sound and put in a sound. What word do you have? And the idea is, can this child, or sometimes an adult, go from cat to pat to tat to hat, and you're working on just the beginning sounds initially. And I've found that kids love it, that kids who get it already think it's kind of fun to play with, and kids who don't get it easily start to understand that they need to pay attention to the individual sounds in words. It eventually makes a big difference in both reading and spelling. And it's something that whole school systems this year have started to adopt, and they've bought huge expensive programs to do this, but you don't really need a huge expensive program. You just need to be able to kind of play with the sounds. All right, Tom, I don't know how we're doing for time and whether you want to stop and see if people have questions. Where did Tom go?
You're muted, Tom.
You've got lots of time, Jan, 15 minutes.
All right, well, let's see. Do people have questions? Is there anything they would like to either share or ask questions about or talk a little bit more about?
Feel free to just unmute yourself.
I have kind of a nuts and bolts
Okay,
question.
sure.
When I was teaching, I made, like you, lots and lots of games.
Yeah.
Which, when I left teaching, I moved. I was in Seattle and
Gave them
gave them
away.
to the next teacher. So, which makes me very sad now.
Yeah, I've done that too.
Gave them all away. So, will you be giving a source, maybe teachers pay teachers or something like that?
You know what? I'm happy to share. I sometimes create my own games. I sometimes do use Teachers Paying Teachers. For those of you who don't know, is a group of teachers who create things for their classroom and have figured out that if they put them for sale on this particular website created by teachers, that they can actually make a few dollars by selling them. And they're usually pretty good. I often get them because of the graphics, because I am not an artist. And sometimes if you want interesting graphics, it's worth the $3 or $4 that they charge for the game. My games, I all have a license for 35 students, because roughly for a classroom, and I use them for 2 kids or 3 kids. So I feel perfectly reasonable and honest about sharing to some extent. Obviously I would not share the software as such, the program, but to share the games. The other thing is, in the past, Tom and I have done a workshop on games, and I have brought a lot of things with me to show and share, and maybe down the road we would do something like that again. But I don't want everybody to think that you have to do games, because you don't. I happen to like games, but it may not be your thing. And I think everybody needs to kind of figure out what their style is and what their kind of shtick is in working. And it also is going to change depending on the population. I also, depending on where you're tutoring, if you're working in a school, they may have materials that they're willing to share and let you use in their and with their students. So it's going to vary depending on where you are. But I'm happy to share whatever I have.
Thank you.
Sure. Anybody else got a question?
I actually have a question, if that's okay.
Sure.
I know you were just talking about how everyone, games aren't everybody's style, and you need to figure out what your style is. how do you do that when you're also trying to work with a kid one-on-one and figure out what works for them, and at the same time, what works for you to teach?
I think that the key to working with a group or a kid is that connection. Because until you've made a connection and they trust you and feel safe with you, you're not going to probably be able to figure out what they need. Because most often kids with coded, testable, evidence-based learning disabilities have above average IQs, not below average IQs. They're bright. They fake it a lot. They kind of squeeze through the cracks until they get to 5th grade, and then all of a sudden they can't keep up and everybody is shocked. I had an 8th grade parent this week of an 8th grader who said, my kid's been kind of going along fine, and now all of a sudden she's in big trouble and we're worried about high school. And it's because this child was bright and could kind of fake it and didn't have a connection with someone along the way that she could talk to, that could see. So in the beginning, I think it's more important to build that relationship and that sense of trust. And when I get a student to tutor, I always, if they're in school, I always ask the parent if they have results of testing. Schools usually do 3 rounds of testing a year: beginning of the year, middle of the year, end of the year. It's in DC, it's usually on a computer, but there's a printout. And I often ask to see the printout. And then I get real specifics from the school, not kind of general information, but real specifics if they've done the testing. Things like, if it's in math, things like, this child can count and add and subtract to 10, but can't add and subtract to 20. Now, in 1st grade, that's a requirement, that you're manipulating numbers up in double digits up to 20. And if you can't do that, then there's a problem that needs to be addressed, because then you're going to have trouble in 2nd grade when we're into the hundreds, right? So I think that, as I said, and I don't want to hound on it, but it's true that if the kid feels comfortable. So I have a child who loves Bluey. Do you know who Bluey is? I did not know who Bluey was. For those of you who may not know, Bluey's a dog, there's a family, there's a television show, there's a whole bunch of books. And this child loves, loves, loves Bluey. And so I ordered a Bluey book thinking we would read it together. This Bluey book is way above this child's reading level. And apparently the parents also appreciate Bluey and read the book to her. But for the first few weeks that she came to me, she brought Bluey books and we read them and talked about them. And then I went out and I bought a Bluey sticker book. And so the last 5 minutes of every session, she's allowed to do a page in the Bluey book. Which page do you want to do? And cut out the stickers and put the stickers on. And now I'm at a place where I can actually do some assessing. And the assessing part, depending on the age of the student, is not that hard, because if you listen to a kid read, you can hear how smoothly, how labored, how big a word they can read when they hesitate. And that's kind of a place to start. Does that help?
Tremendously. Thank
I
you.
do. I mean, I think that relationship is kind of the key. It's the same in school. If you don't like if you don't think your teacher likes you, it's a whole different experience. And most of us can remember a time when we had a teacher that we didn't think liked us. And when I was teaching, and I was a assistant principal at one point, and I told my teachers, your job is to find something to like in every kid. And with some kids, it's harder than others. But that's your job, is to find something that you like and something to connect with. And it works both ways. I have 1st graders who come here who are so empathetic and who worry about me because I'm old. And they know I lost my husband, a few years ago, and so I'm alone, and they worry about me. Are you lonely? Who cooks for you? Who takes care of you? They worry about me. And that comes from that kind of building that relationship where they know I like them. And that's kind of all it takes. But as I said, I always, when possible, partner with both the parents and the school to get whatever information I can. I often have conversations with the teacher that is the classroom teacher of the kids I tutor. If you're in a school already, that part's easy because people are already there. And you can ask them, what should I be working on? You don't even have to ask anything specific in terms of if there's a code, if there's a diagnosis, whatever. All you have to ask is, what do you think I should be working on with this child? Because by and large, they'll know.
Thank you, Jen.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Yeah, this is Mamadou. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
I had a question, going back to what you just answered for Tall. When you meet a student at first, or you meet a child at first, and they're a bit more reserved, how do you go about building that like trust and like allowing them to get more vulnerable with you?
Okay, so I'm in a private practice, so my experience is a little different, but I'll tell you what I do, and then I'll tell you what I did in school. I generally had small groups and not one-on-one. But I always invite, when a parent emails me, calls me, texts me, and says they want help for their child, for their student, and do I have a slot, and am I interested? I always invite a parent or two parents, depending on their schedule and time, and the student to come here to my tutoring room and to meet me. And I don't charge them. And we do a 15-minute kind of getting to know you. And I remind the parents that they're dropping off a child with a stranger, and you don't want to do that. You want this kid to feel comfortable with me. It also gives me a chance to see if this is a child that I think I can work with. Because if I think that this child has needs that I cannot meet, then I want to refer them to someone else. I don't want to take them and not be able to help them. But the first thing we do usually is we play a card game, and I make the parent play too. And I have made a lot of games based on Uno because my kids love Uno. No matter what age they are, they love Uno. So I have Uno sight words, Uno patterns of combinations and all kinds of words. I have Uno addition and subtraction. I have figurative language Uno for when I taught English language learners. So we usually play a short game, and then I ask my kids what they like. What do you do when you're not in school? What do you play sports? Do you sit and read? What do you do? Tell me something about you. I don't ask about the family, although I often get to know the family because they bring their kids here. Sometimes they sit in my living room and use my Wi-Fi and work, but I have a lot of Washington lawyers and people from the FBI and such, and they don't want to make phone calls in my house, and so they sit in their car and work for the half hour that I have. With little ones, I don't usually take for more than a half hour. But I usually do a kind of a 15-minute game. And I remind my kids all the time, you don't win anything if you win this game. There is no prize. There is no physical reward. This is just having fun. And so it doesn't matter who wins. It's not important who wins. It only matters if we're having a good time. And if in the process of having a good time, we're reading, because that's what this is all about. Or we're doing math, because that's what this is all about. So, and I think you get to find out more about kids, like my kid who liked Bluey. It didn't take her long at all to tell me that she loved Bluey. And I then went online and watched a Bluey episode on YouTube and bought a Bluey book and tried to figure out what I could learn about Bluey that might be helpful with her. So you just have to kind of figure out, but they'll tell you if they're passionate about something or there's something they love, they'll tell you. But I think it's not a waste of time at all to spend lots of time getting to know the person that you're tutoring, even in high school. Getting to know people and building that sense of this is a safe place. This is a place where it's okay if you show me that you don't know how to do something. This is a place where it's okay if you tell me I don't get that. Tell me again. When I was in California, my husband was highly dyslexic, and my students all knew that. And when I was in California teaching, I had groups of kids, and sometimes I would teach every single way I could possibly think of. And I had one or two kids who still didn't get it. And the kids would look at me and say, call your husband and ask him how he does it. And I often did that. I would call him and say, okay, I've taught this way and this way and this way, and they don't get it. And how do you do it? Because he had learned all kinds of alternative ways of doing things as a dyslexic reader. And often he would say, oh, try this. And sometimes it worked. But I go back again, that bond, that trust that this is a safe place, and I like you. And I like you even if you can't read. I like you even if you can't add. I like you even if you make lots of mistakes. It's okay. I still like you, and we can fix it. And I tell kids all the time, that's my job. My job is to help you to the point where you don't need me anymore. You're fine on your own and you don't need me. And if you want to stay my friend, that's okay. I have kids who write me. I have kids who send me, families that send me Christmas cards from like 25 years ago. I have a kid who left this week. They moved to Florida, and I gave her a stamped envelope addressed to me, and said, if you want to write me a letter, I will write back to you. She said, I've never written a letter in my life. I said, well, if you decide you want to write it, I would be happy to answer this letter. But it's okay. I like you just the way you are, kind of Mr. Rogers. I like you just the way you are. And once you establish that, the rest of it's a piece of cake, because the skills they need are easily taught to you. I would imagine a lot of you already have them and just don't know it. Some of you have it and do know it, but they're not complicated, especially if you're teaching reading. We're looking at kids to understand that letters have sounds, and that when you put the groups of letters together, you're putting the groups of sounds together, and together that makes a word, and that word has meaning. And I am kind of obnoxious about asking kids on a continual basis, do you know what that word means? Because when I taught English language learners for the first time, I assumed that my kids knew basic words, and they didn't. They didn't, and that was my fault. And so now I kind of maybe overdo it, but I'm constantly saying to my kids as we're reading and we'll come across a word that I'm not sure they know, do you know what that word means? And a lot of times they'll say yes, and they'll use it in a sentence, or sometimes they'll sheepishly say no. And now I have kids who, when they come to a word they don't know, will ask me, what is that word? What does that word mean? Because even if you are a great decoder, even if you can read every word on the page, if you don't understand the meaning of those words, you're still not reading. Because reading is getting meaning from all those words that you figured out what they say. Reading is not calling out a letter or a word. Reading is getting meaning from the words on the page. So you need two skills. You need to be able to figure out what that word says, and you need to know what that word means. So with my 4th and 5th graders, I do a lot of vocabulary, and I do a little bit of morphology. I don't know a lot about morphology in a technical sense, but I certainly know to explain to them, oh, that's a prefix or that's a suffix, and it changes the word, and here's what this prefix means. And what I don't know, I look up. And there's not a day that goes by when a kid asks me a question and I'll pull up my phone and say, isn't it amazing we have this little computer here that we can look it up? Because it's ridiculous to kind of pretend you know everything in the world, because no one knows everything in the world. And so I look things up on a daily basis with my kids. Sometimes they'll ask me about a word and I know the definition, but I'm not sure that I can explain it in a way that will be helpful to them. So I will look it up.
Thank you, Jan. Other questions?
I'm curious, Jan, if you could actually talk through a little bit more of
Sure.
like strategies, thinking of, you know, the phonemic awareness and
Okay,
kind
so
of layering that in. What are some strategies that we
the
could
first thing
consider?
I do when I get a kid, even unless they're like in 4th and 5th grade and I'm working on fluency or comprehension, is I actually have a deck of cards that is every letter and every combination of letters kind of, and I will actually do a drill. I will hold up a letter and say, what is this letter? And somebody will say A, and I'll say, how many sounds does it make? Now, some of my kids will say, oh, one, it says ah. And then I'll have to say, A is a really tricky one because it can make 4 sounds. But if they're in kindergarten or 1st grade, I will teach 2. Oh, A can say its name, A, and A can say ah. Now, I don't know, do you know what a schwa is? Probably not. Okay, schwa is the fancy name. It comes from an old Hebrew term, and I'm not sure why. That's for the ah sound that Americans, more than other people, use. Like in the word banana, it ends in an A, but we say ah, banana. We are not very good with diction. We are not very careful about all of our vowels, which makes spelling hard. But we make that ah sound, and any vowel can make an ah sound in a word. So I don't teach that till like 3rd grade, but in my little kids, I will hold up the letter R. What is this letter? What sound does it make? Then I'll move to what kids now call glued sounds. ING, ANT, right? Those chunks of words. And we will drill them, especially the vowels, because in my experience, the trickiest thing about teaching reading is vowel sounds. Kids really get stuck on those vowel sounds. And in the kindergarten and 1st grade, they teach only that short vowel sound, ah, ah. And their school probably do it too, but especially my kids who are from a Spanish-speaking background often really struggle with the difference between I and E in English and I and E in Spanish. So I have cues. When we need an I go like this because I teach them itchy. And if they get stuck, I do this and they go, oh, itchy. And schools usually have keywords and things that they do. But that's where I always start, is with the initial letters and the sounds. And do you know them all? And then traditionally in the development of reading in a system starts with 3-letter words with a vowel in the middle. Cat, dot, hut, whatever. And so once kids get through that, then you teach the diphthongs, 2 diphthongs and digraphs, 2 letters that make one sound, like TH and SH and CH, right? And you just keep adding. Silent E gets taught, I think, in the end of 1st grade, 2nd grade, depends on the school or the setting. But you kind of do this progression of single letters to groups of letters. And when they know those, then you can kind of put together everything. With older kids, I don't teach phonics that way because it's kind of insulting. And I think if they didn't get it, it didn't work the first time, why would I do it again? So with older kids, I teach syllables. And I will teach kind of common syllables. I have them all printed on 5x7 index cards. And when I taught high school kids, they sat in a circle and I would hold up a thing and we would go around. I would hold it up and it would be your turn and you would read the syllable. And then I would come up with a word that had that syllable in it. So they could see that connection. Like, here's an ARD, ard. What does that mean? And then I would say, oh, mustard or mustard. I would try and find a word. And they would get to keep it if they could read it on their turn. And then we would count them at the end, high school kids. For every 10 cards you read, you got to Reese's Pieces, because I had kids who would do anything for Reese's Pieces, and I would go to Costco and buy them by the case. But so it's kind of whatever it takes to hook the kid. If they're a little kid, they just want to read because they want to be like everybody else in their class, or their older brother or sister, and they are very aware of the fact that they can't do what the kid sitting next to them can do at school, and that feels kind of crummy. And they don't want to feel that way. And so they hold up a chapter book and pretend. Right? And my job is to teach them you don't have to pretend, because you can read this. You just we haven't figured out a way yet to show you that makes sense to you so that you can do it. It's really not, it's not that hard. It really isn't. And I just think kids are amazing. Kids are absolutely amazing. And that aha of when they get something is like the biggest high in the world for me. So I just love it. And I think if you try it, you will love it too.
Thank you, Jan. Any other questions?
No. So let me ask this in general. What are you thinking? Are you thinking that if you're not tutoring yet, that maybe this is something that sounds like fun and that you want to try? Yes? Maybe?
I can say that in the context of working with a fifth grader who has the reading problems, you've opened my mind to some of the games that I can do. He just taught me how to play Uno, so I can.
Oh, so we'll see. I have kids who play Uno. They are almost professional gamblers. And I have a third grader who beats me every week, and I don't try to lose. But my game has upped tremendously from teaching, because I guess they play it in their house. And there are different rules in different houses for how you play it, apparently. But,
well, and we started with chess. I had to learn chess, and he beat me almost every time. I mean, without me trying to lose.
yeah, but it's good for him because he feels good and feels smart.
He feels really good about winning.
Yeah. Well, I'm happy to show people games at some point. As I said, I do them up and laminate them and actually spend money. I print them and cut them and laminate them. But you don't need to do that, because I didn't always have the funds to do things like that when I was in the public school system, and they weren't about to give me the money. So I just made them on paper and index cards, and it doesn't matter. They play the same way, especially if we're working with one kid. But I do think no matter what age, that basis of, is the alphabetic code strong? Is that letter and vowel understanding strong enough to manipulate? It needs to be the kind of the foundation. And even when I've taught adults, I've taught with syllables rather than individual sounds, because adult or child, if they can read in another language, that understanding of that code system that this represents, this is already there. And it's much easier for them to get that second language piece.
I've got a question, Jan.
Yeah.
Do you try to do anything with writing? Do you integrate the writing?
You know, in the past, I've had kids just for writing. I had a sixth grader who wrote, the cat is yellow. The cat is small. The cat is, and so the school was very concerned about the writing. And so I worked on a sentence combining program with this kid. We took two small short sentences and turned them into one more complex, interesting sentence. And then we just kept building. I work with my older kids on descriptive paragraphs as a way to start before we get into different kinds of writing. We work on just writing. Sometimes I do things like, I'll put my coffee cup on the table and say, okay, you have 7 minutes, and I'll set a timer. I want 6 sentences about the coffee cup. Tell me what it's made out of, what it looks like, what its purpose is, what the shape is, whatever you can do to describe it. And then we build from the concrete to the abstract in the writing. But with my younger kids, I write only in terms of encoding the decoding. So once I teach SH says shh, and we read all these words that have the sh in them, I then the next week will dictate some words that have the sh sound to see if they get that when I hear it, what I write is the SH. And there's lots of research that doing that kind of learning the sound and then writing the sound together makes a huge difference. It's the basis of a lot of the Orton-Gillingham system, which is the primary one used for dyslexia. I think lately that's the primary one. But so in that sense, I do a lot of dictation, but not actual writing unless I have a kid who requests it, whose family that they're looking for the writing. In the past, I've done writing with some high school kids. And really what I've done is just work on writing a solid paragraph. Because once you can write a really solid paragraph, you can write a lot. But it's that first understanding of what goes in a paragraph and what makes it cohesive and how much detail does it, or evidence or whatever kind of paragraph you're writing needs to be there. Yeah.
Thank you, Jan. And Rosario put a question in the chat. Can you share some of the teaching materials you use, the
Oh,
games,
sure.
etc.?
All right. So the games that I use are mostly ones that I made. Really, we should do a game night, or we should do a game one. I don't have my document camera hooked up, but I can show you.
While you're getting that out, are you buying Uno games by the case also, or
I make them. No, I make them.
you
So
make them from scratch?
yeah. Well, I don't always create them from scratch. Sometimes other people have done the work, but they'll let me buy it. I don't know if I can show you this. So I have this thing called, I can't do it. Yeah. This is Phonics Monsters. So there are 3 sets of cards. A beginning, can you see it? A beginning
Yes.
piece, a vowel little piece in the middle, and an end piece with an ending letter. And I put the 3 in a stack in the middle. And this first one that I have in front of me says CIS. And it's important to be able to read a nonsense word as well as the real word. And so the child will say, now this is a hard one because C can be K and can be S, and it has an I. But so when my first graders wouldn't know that yet, they wouldn't have learned the 2 sounds of C. But anyway, I will say, is that a word? And they'll say no. And I'll say, you're right. I don't know what a cis. Anyway, then I'll say, let's take one away. One of the middle, the beginning, or the end, and see if we can get a word that you know. Now, my next word is a real word, B-I-N. And this monster, I wish I could show you, they're silly. The monsters, they're kind of crazy. And so then I'll say, is that a word? And if the child says, oh, yes, that's a word, then they get to keep that monster. And they spread them all out and they cover the whole table with my silly monsters. So that's one that I do a lot with beginning readers because we're kind of looking at the sounds, but rather than just saying, what is this word and what is this letter, we put together these crazy monsters that they love, and we read silly words and they think that's very fun. But let me show you an Uno game. Okay, this is an upper grade Uno game. Now, I have discovered, as I said, I spend money, but I charge for my services. These are pouches that are for ID cards. And I have discovered that if I buy these and put the cards in them, they're rounded at the corners, and my little kids, when I used to just do them in a sheet and cut them up the cheap way, they would be sharp sometimes on the corners, or they would peel. So this word is laziness, and this word is mathematical. And this is an Uno game for an upper grade. And then here's a wild card. It has all the same cards that Uno has, and you have to match the color or the number And I have a kid who is expert at collecting and saving draw two cards and then stacking them. Now, some kids don't play stack, but in her house they stack, which means if I put down a blue draw two card, I can also put down the green draw card and the yellow draw. And so now I have 6 or 8 to pick. And this kid does this to me every time we play. Right. And so I end up with 22 cards in my hand as I'm trying to maneuver from these kids. They're very good. They're very sophisticated at how to play Uno. But I probably have 25 Uno games in various forms, and I would be happy to show people. But as I said, these are the ones that I made in the old days that are cheaper, where you put a whole bunch of squares on one sheet of laminate and cut it up. Now, you don't even need to laminate them. I laminate them because I'm using them over the years with lots of kids. Some of these games are 20 years old and I still have them. But if I was just working with one kid or 2 kids, I wouldn't do all of that. I would just draw it on a piece of paper and use a crayon, use a whatever it takes. And then maybe I would invite the kid to help me design my next game. What do you think the next game should look like? Because your kid can write letters on if you cut out squares of paper, your kid can write letters and draw pictures, and your kid could help you make the next game and be even more invested in how it worked. But I would
Thank
be
you,
happy
Jen.
to share all of this stuff.
I know you'd worked at Tyler with small groups as well. And
Yeah, at Tyler, I had a group of kindergartners who were English language learners that in their family, no one spoke English. And they spoke street English. So the research on language acquisition is that it takes 2 to 3 years to learn communication English. Hi, how are you? You look nice today. I liked your shirt. Where did you buy that? But that it takes 7 years to learn academic language. And I don't know if that research has changed. I don't think it has, but it takes longer to learn academic language than it does to learn casual talk to your friends language. And they spoke casual English, but they had no help at home with reading or with homework because their parents didn't speak any English. And in a lot of cases, the parents were not educated past 4th or 5th grade if they came from Guatemala or Ethiopia, depend on where they came from and what their circumstances were. So a lot of the games I made to work with those kids to teach English and to teach language. And the rest of my kids at Tyler were just small groups of kids who weren't reading where they should be, but nobody tested them or said they're this or that. They just weren't where everybody else in the room was. And so my job was to get them there if I could. They like the games. They think it's fun. They like to win. It's a really good incentive. It's an easy way to teach and to practice and review and to assess.
thank you, Jen. We've got 8 more minutes. We can divide up into small groups if you want to chat in groups and just get to kind of meet each other and get to know each other a little better, or folks would prefer to ask any more questions, we could do that too.
Anybody who lives near me and wants to just come over and see all my stuff, you consider it an open invitation. If you check with me before you come, because I have kids all afternoon.
We
But-
will send out a evaluation form, and we'd really welcome your thoughts on other sessions you'd like us to do. That would be helpful. And we'll make whatever material you need available. Also, if you're working with a organization and would like a tailored presentation for to meet the needs of Community Club or North Star at Rita Bright or whatever, let us know. We're happy to work with your organizations as well. And
yeah, I am old enough so that one of the advantages is I've been through, I don't know how many of, this is the program everybody's using. And 2 years later, oh no, this is now the program everybody's using. And I am never a purist in any of them, but I know enough of them so that I can pick pieces of this one and pieces of that one to fit what the kid needs. And I think that's one of the advantages of having been around for forever, is that I know a lot of programs, and I have a ton of material here, which I would love to share.
Thanks, Jen. You know, I just stress, I mean, our broader mission at DC Tutoring and Mentoring Initiative is, you know, we got 60,000 kids in DC alone who are reading below grade level, and even more who are struggling with math. So I'm really on a mission to try to, you know, try to mobilize tens of thousands of people to help. And you know, you may walk away feeling like, well, I'm not sure I learned lots of technical skills, but hopefully nothing else, you walk away from here feeling like, wow, this is something I can do. It will be rewarding and I can make a difference.
Huge
And
difference. Yeah, you
I may
change
have to
kids.
figure it out with the kid I'm working with, or the small group I'm working with. But
There are
you know,
people to help you. You're not alone.
so yeah, Connie.
So I'm curious about the next step.
Okay.
How do we get matched up? How does that all happen?
Yeah, so I don't know if you're in our database, but I will make a note and somebody on the team will reach out to you. And, you know, basically if you haven't done it already, there's a form on the front page of our website that just asks for, you know, when you're available, what neighborhoods would be convenient for you, what age group you want to work with. Since you're already a teacher, mention that.
I did that. And so now that's
Oh.
that's the only thing I need to do now. And I wait.
Yeah,
or-
we're trying to get back to everybody within a week.
Okay.
So if we haven't, we will very, very shortly.
Got it.
I'll just jump in real quick and share for anybody who hasn't become a volunteer but is interested in doing so. I put the link in the chat, and you can also on the same website.
Hope you're muted, Paul.
Sorry. Yeah. You can set up a 15-minute phone call with one of our team members. It can go over 15 minutes. And you can just learn more about, you know, what options exist. If there's an organization you're particularly interested in and want to learn more about, you can talk with one of our team members before committing. And yeah, shared the link in the chat for anyone who's interested.
So as we look at your partners, is the need more for the younger children who are just learning how to read, or it seems like you have a lot of high school age needs too? If we have limited time and you have limited time, where would you like to see us put those resources?
Really, whatever works for you. I mean, the needs are they're broad.
Yeah, they're everywhere, but it needs to be someplace you're going to feel comfortable and to work with that age group, whatever that happens to be for you, because the needs are everywhere in the city.
I mean, I would say, you know, we have a lot of young men who would like to have mentors in their lives. So, you know, we'd especially be interested in finding more guys who want to become mentors. And, you know, that can entail kind of a mix of mentoring and maybe a little tutoring too. But, you know, we support a number of programs that are especially focused on helping students who would be the first in their families hopefully heading to college. You would get paired with a high school freshman or sophomore. And then the expectation is you would spend a minimum of 6 months, but probably at least a year, if not several years, working with that student and, you know, connecting with them and helping them think about college choices, helping them think about what classes to take in high school, you know, just kind of being there as a guide for them.
So if your partners, where would something like that, or is this an offline conversation where you would match people up like that?
Probably easier to do offline. I mean, we've got just a range of different choices that focus on high school. I mean, College Bound and Spark the Journey are probably the two biggest, but we do have others that very much need mentors also.
Great.
But you know, like I said, we're just looking for 10, you know, if we get 10% of able-bodied, you know, adults helping out with who have an hour or two a week to spare, you know, we could, all 60,000 kids in DC who need extra support could, you know, at least have one extra caring adult in their lives. So, you know, whatever works for you would work for us. All right, well, it's 8:44. I think we'll wrap it up here. And Jan, thank you.
Oh, thank you.
From the bottom of my heart. This has been great.
As you can tell, I love this. So if anyone wants to look at games or continue this conversation one-on-one, let Tom know, and I'm happy to do that.
I think you all have my email. Yeah. Well, thank you all for attending. I hope this has been valuable.
Thank you. It's been very valuable.
You.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
all for coming.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for your time.
Yeah. Take care. Have a great rest of your evening.
You too.